Welcome to this second day of this interesting conference. Personally, I'm delighted to see so many of us who were involved in the earlier days are still alive, and also to see just how many younger people are working in the field. But our first speaker is Guillaume Semergen, who I still think of as a young lad who came to visit me in Oxford, only to discover it was really rather a long time ago. Pardon, it's not working. Okay, well, whatever. It's now time to start with the real start of the thing, and it's Guillaume Semergen from Paris is going to tell us about what you can read there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, David, and I would like first to thank a lot the organizer for the invitation to give this talk, in which I will try to present two results obtained, one with Federico Richter-Zanchi and Louise Budzinski, my PhD student, and another one with Louise. Louise is a postdoc, so I invite you to go and see her to ask further questions if you want. So this is going to be about constraint satisfaction problems, so maybe it's not something that most of you are very familiar with. So I will make an introduction to this kind of problems and discuss the connection with glasses and spin glasses, so that will sound more familiar. And then I will discuss two results about one of the transitions that appears in these problems that is known as the dynamic transition. So constraint satisfaction problems are systems where you have a set of variables and a set of constraints on it. So the two examples I'm going to focus on is first the graph coloring problem, in which the variables are Potts spin living on the vertices of a graph, and the constraints are that the edges have to bear vertices of different colors. Okay, so you can think of it as an antiferromagnetic Potts model at 0 temperature. And configuration proper coloring of the graph are called solution of this constraint satisfaction problem. Another variant, which is known as the hypergraph by coloring problem, is very similar. The difference is that now there are only two colors, so think of Ising spin plus or minus 1, but the interactions are not edges between two vertices, but hyper edges between k vertices. And again, you ask that the hyperedge is not monochromatic. So there is at least one of the colors plus and one of the color minus in the neighborhood of each interaction. To turn this into a random system, or to put it in another way, a simple way to generate instance of these problems is just to choose the edges at random. And this creates a structure which is known as the Erdős-Rényi random graph, or Erdős-Rényi random hypergraph. And the interesting regime is the thermodynamic limit, where more precisely both the number of variables and the number of constraints go to infinity with a fixed ratio that will be denoted alpha. So many people have worked on this problem. Many of them are in the room, both from statistical mechanics, computer science, discrete mathematics, and so on. I'm not going to do a full history, of course, of this long line of research, but just try to explain in a few words one of the outcomes of this series of interdisciplinary works, which is sketched here. So the point is that there are phase transitions when this parameter alpha is changed. So the various squares are here represent, in a sketchy way, of course, a projection of the configuration space. And black dots represent solution of the problem. So there is one transition which is very easy to understand. It's the satisfiability phase transition, above which there is no solution at all with high probability in the thermodynamic limit. Below this, there are solutions. There are some black dots in it, but you can see that the structure of the space of solution changes. There is the dynamic transition, which is a clustering transition, at which the set of solution breaks from something which you can think of a pure state into many pure states, exponentially many pure states. And then a condensation phase transition in which the number of relevant pure states go from exponential to sub-exponential. Okay? So this, I mean, for people which are more, whom are more familiar with glasses and spin glasses, these two transitions are nothing but the two transitions of the P spin for P larger than 3, or the two transitions of RFOT. Okay, so.
Can I just, all of those transitions exist at 0 temperature as well? Or
Here I am at 0 temperature. Yeah. So alpha D and alpha C are continued, will be continued at positive temperature if you define as an Hamiltonian the number of unsatisfied constraints. Alpha S is something which makes sense only at 0 temperature. Okay, I will talk actually only, only about the dynamic transition, the first one. And it's very important to keep in mind that this transition can be characterized or defined or appreciated in various, with various definitions. One of them, which is the one which is more apparent with this drawing, is a clustering of the solution space. So breaking apart the set of solutions into pure states or parts which have, free energy barriers which separate them to want to go from one from the other. Rather naturally, you can expect and somehow prove that this implies also an exponential relaxation time for the for Monte Carlo Markov chains, in the sense that, in mean field, the free energy barriers to go from one of these pure states to another are extensive. And another point of view that will be useful in the end is that this also marks the birth of some sort of correlation, long-range correlation, but it's a subtle way of defining correlation. It's not a point-to-point, not a two-point correlation function, but it's a so-called point-to-set correlation functions. I will come back a little bit more on the definition later. It's related to a problem which is purely probabilistic of reconstruction on tree. And I'm sure that in the session on RFOT, I've seen the name point-to-set in some abstracts. So you will come back on this later on. So let me describe the first result I want to discuss on this dynamic transition. So as, it was a part of the answer to Daniel's question, is that here, the phase transition I've described, they are obtained by taking really the 0 temperature limit, but in such a way that all the solution, all the proper colorings of the graph, for instance, are given the same probability. It's just a uniform measure on the set of solution. The question that one can raise is what happens if we still concentrate our probability measure, our Gibbs measure, on the set of solution. We give 0 weight to the other configuration, but we weight the solution differently, okay? And differently in a way that it's strictly positive for all solutions, but as I said, non-uniform. And to make something tractable, it should be made of local interaction, this weight. So by definition, the satisfiability phase transition is not modified because the support of this measure, what I define as a solution with positive weight or not, is not modified. But of course, the structural phase transition, so the dynamic and the condensation transition, they change with this weight. And the point I want to make, which, as I will discuss later, has some interest, is that you can move this dynamic transition to higher values of the density of constraints by choosing a well-chosen choice of the bias. It's important to have in mind that this kind of phenomenon really arises because the configuration space is exponentially large, and so there are a lot of large deviation effects. So typical solution that were the one drawn in the diagrams I've shown you can become typical, and atypical ones can become typical by this kind of interaction. So that's why it can change such a phase transition. Okay, and so let me give one example that we have worked out completely with Luis and Federico. So it's on the case of the hypergraph by coloring. I'm putting interactions which live on the constraints, on the original constraint of the graph. in such a way that if the sum of spin is plus or minus k, so if all the spins are plus 1 or minus 1, I give 0 weight to this constraint. So it's a product, so it kills such configuration. And the only thing with respect to the usual measures that I do is that the configuration which are almost unsatisfied, where there is only 1 plus or 1 minus, I give them a different weight, 1 minus epsilon. Okay? As long as epsilon is strictly smaller than 1, this falls into the setting I've described, because B is always strictly positive for the solution. But I'm affecting in some ways, I'm changing the way the various solutions are weighted in the measure. Okay? And here is the results obtained by solving the cavity equation at the 1RSB level for this problem. So here it's in the case k equals to 5. So here you have on this axis alpha, the density of constraint, and here this biasing parameter epsilon, and the shaded area is the replica symmetric area. Okay? So the point of this graph is that the alpha d for the uniform measure, which was around 9.4, can be brought by a suitable choice of epsilon to 9.6, okay, which is larger. So why could this be interesting? So it's very, it's I think a weak part of our understanding of constraint satisfaction problem and the understanding of algorithm to solve them. But at least there is something which is not a theorem, I would say, but a morally true theorem, is that for alpha smaller than alpha d, simulated annealing with a suitable annealing schedule will be able to sample from such a measure in polynomial time. Okay, maybe modulo some technical restriction, but I think this is morally true. So alpha d, you can view it as a lower bound for the threshold at which algorithms are able to find solution in polynomial time. Okay? It's far from being a tight bound. Indeed, it is well known and seen in simulation that, okay, for once, there are a lot of algorithms that do not respect detail balance, on which alpha d has nothing to do. And even for simulated annealing, if you apply it above alpha d, well, at some point you will fall out of equilibrium, but it might be that still at the end of your annealing you will find solutions out of equilibrium, but you don't really mind. What you want is just to find a solution, it's still possible. But, okay, we have done numerical simulation of simulated annealing, and the main point I want to make here is that, okay, we cannot describe analytically exactly what happens to simulated annealing, but what we have seen is that the residual energy at the end of an annealing of various time, so the colors are for various annealing times, the three plots are for different alpha. Well, what you can see on this plot is that there is a minimum at a positive value of epsilon. Okay, so a biased measure allows to reach lower energies of this at the end of the annealing, even when it's out of equilibrium. And more precisely, when I said we don't really understand algorithms in random CSP, well, I think that one of the main open questions in this field is what happens when k gets large, or q for the number of coloring. Here, it's possible to do analytic expansion, and we have a precise characterization, for instance, of the satisfiability threshold. There is a full asymptotic expansion, but essentially, this is the behavior at large k. And the dynamic transition happens much before. Okay, there is a factor 1 over k, forget the logarithm for the moment. There is a factor 1 over k between these two transitions. And the point is that the best algorithms that one can analyze rigorously, and this one is due to, the best one I think is due to Amin, they have threshold above which they don't manage to find solution, which scale as alpha d in the large scale limit. Which means that there is a whole regime of degree of parameter in which we know for sure that there are solutions, but we don't know polynomial time algorithm that finds solution. Of course, if P is equal to NP, I mean, there is no such gap. If P is different from NP, I mean, in some optimistic sense, you can say that this is where, I mean, the real difficulty of such satisfiability problems come from. Okay, so confronted with this statement, there are two things one can try. Well, either to find better algorithm that reduce this algorithmic gap, or show that the largest possible class of algorithm cannot, under some hypothesis, and there are results by Gamanik and Sudan which go in this direction. So here I have in mind a little bit to try to go in the first direction before, trying to improve algorithm. And so, as I said, as alpha d is a lower bound on the algorithmic threshold, well, you can hope that, increasing alpha d will give you algorithms that work at a better range. Yeah.
You mean algorithms to find exact solutions?
Sorry?
You mean algorithms for exact?
So, yeah, so here I'm talking about algorithm to find one solution.
So it's different from Montanari yesterday with that approximate.
Yeah. It's kind of a different system because here the ground state, if you want, is 0. I mean, if there is a solution, so it's a bit different than approximation. In this regime, the formulas are typically satisfiable. So what I should aim at is finding one solution. Okay. So, well, the bad news, is that for the very simple strategy that I presented before, you cannot hope too much. Yes.
One remark is that in the difficult regime, there is no algorithm that even gives you an epsilon. For a whole range. In that range between 2 to k minus 1 and k plus k. No.
It's not full. Yeah, it will be for alpha which scales with n. That was my question yesterday. With alpha which scales with n, where it's very unsatisfiable, there will be, I think, interesting things to do with your algorithm. But okay, maybe we discuss that later. So, as I said, the strategy I presented with this bias, with just this parameter epsilon, cannot give much because, well, if you look more precisely at this expansion, so it's log k plus log k in the correction terms, and very simple-minded bounds show that with the strategy I've shown and with the best possible choice of epsilon, at most you replace the log k by a square root of log k, and even that is I think, an optimistic bound. But okay, so this simple strategy cannot do much. But the point is that here, there are a lot of other possibility of creating biases between the solution with interaction at longer range, and I will discuss a little bit why one could hope that these other possibilities are better. Before moving to the second part, I want to mention some related works. So it has become customary in the last years to think of R-sphere as constraint satisfaction problems, or vice versa maybe. But well, indeed, R-spheres, you have variables which are the position of the sphere and constraints that they do not overlap. So the equivalent of putting an additional soft bias on R-sphere is precisely to add an additional soft interaction on top of the hardcore potential. And this is something that Mauro Sellito and Francesco Zamponi had already done in some cases, and we made more systematic study also with Thibaut Mambo, who is in the room, and that you can ask more details to him if you want. As I said, all this idea of biases are deeply related in large deviation of properties of constraint satisfaction problems, and we are done with Lanka and also Alfredo Bronstein and Luca Dall'Asta a study of some of these large deviation properties some year ago. And also it's related to something which was mentioned in the talk of Mark and also in the talk of Lanka, so the works of Zekina and collaborators, where they also try to distinguish various solutions of problems. So they concentrate on the perceptron problem, depending on the local entropy of such solution. So it's also related to the idea I presented. Okay, so let me turn to the second part, to the second result I want to present. So, as I said, I mean, if one wants to make a progress on the understanding of this algorithmic gap, one will need to do a large K or Q asymptotics of this transition in the case of tilted measure and show that it's better than for the non-tilted measure. But actually, I mean, even for the uniform case, it's not such a trivial problem. And actually, we made some at least confusing statement in this paper with Andrea and Federico some time ago. So I will try to make a more precise and hopefully true statement today. So the scaling, as I said, for the hypergraph by coloring, the scaling on which the dynamic transition occurs as an expansion like this. So there is an exponential term, a 1 over k, and then an expansion with log k, log k, and a constant. For the graph coloring problem, it's essentially the same form. The prefactor is different, and it's more natural to express it in terms of the average degree. There is just a factor 2 between alpha and c, but it's the same form. So what was known rigorously until now, so for a large class of model, Andrea and co-workers derived the leading term in this asymptotic expansion. Okay? Alan Sly had much more precise result for the Q coloring problem. So he showed this, the form of this expansion, and he had bound on the value of gamma, this constant, gamma d, between 1 and 1 minus log 2, so it's around 0.3, at which this transition occurs. And then it seems a small improvement, but actually it's a conceptual, very important one. It shows that it's strictly smaller than 1. Okay, so what we have done, I mean, the results we have obtained are mainly, I mean, 3 on which I will concentrate. First of all, is that it's exactly, I mean, analytically the same value of gamma d for these two models, for the Q coloring problem and for the K hypergraph by coloring problem, which is, I mean, not completely obvious at first sight because the models are microscopically rather different, but it turns out that you have the same value for gamma. This value can be computed, I mean, at least determined numerically from a solution of a functional equation, which is more complicated than the usual population dynamics equations we are used to, but that I will explain a little bit why. And okay, this number falls into the rigorous bounds. That's good news. And also, I think that I mean, it is probably a number which has no simple analytical value. Well, one can always hope, but this does not seem to appear naturally. But I think that there is a lower bound, which is not too bad, which will be easier to, I mean, which can be obtained analytically. So I want to spend the last 5 minutes in trying to explain why it's not a trivial computation, even for, I mean, at the level of theoretical physics rigor. So let me come back to the interpretation I mentioned about point-to-set correlation for the birth of alpha d. So the Hölder parameter of this transition, you can think it in this way. So draw a thermalized configuration, or here a uniform solution of the constraint satisfaction problem. Choose a point arbitrarily on the graph. Look at the solution on the vertices which are at a certain distance away from the center of the root. Now, you look only at the vertices on this boundary, you forget all the observation you had, and you ask yourself, what can I say about the value of the spin at the root? Okay? And so it's clear that if this cavity is very small, at small distance, you will have a lot of information. This will be very much correlated. In the limit where first the thermodynamic limit is taken, and then the distance between the boundary you observe and the root gets large, well, in some case, you still have a non-trivial information, and this is precisely the point-to-set correlation, or it goes to 0. Okay, and so alpha d is the point where this large distance point-to-set correlation becomes different from 0, and this is plotted here with the dots. Okay, and so alpha d here is the place where this gets appears. You can play a simpler game. Well, again, you choose a configuration, you look at it far away, and you ask yourself, can I guess without any doubt what is the value of the spin at the root? Okay? And this becomes true above another value of alpha, which is, it's called a frozen variable because then the root is completely frozen by the value of the boundary or a rigidity transition or art fields in the 1RSB population of fields in different languages. And okay, this obviously is a lower bound because if you are able to get the root without any doubt, then you certainly have information on the root. So that's why this curve W is below C and why so it has its birth at a value alpha r which is larger. So W is the fraction of art fields, if you want. The fraction of frozen variables. So I do the point-to-set correlation. I only ask whether there is an art field on the root, so that the boundary strictly determines the center of the ball. And okay, this has the advantage of being a solution of a scalar bifurcation equation, so you can compute it very easily, and in particular, expand at large K to obtain this expansion with the 1 for the expansion of the burst. So it gives naturally the upper bound gamma d smaller or equal than 1. So this was the easy part in the analysis of Alan Sly. So showing that it's strictly smaller is the difficult part as well as the lower bound. So now, not only can you expand the value at which this W appears, but you can also compute how it scales at large K. And actually, it gets crushed on the value 1. So it's 1 minus correction, which goes to 0, like 1 over K log K. Okay? As C is lower bounded by this, it must certainly go to 1 as well in this regime. And it's a natural assumption that, is self-consistent to think that it also goes to 1 in the same way as 1 over K log K. Okay? And this is why it's difficult. Okay? Because between gamma D and gamma R, by definition, there are no strictly art fields which completely constrain a variable. At the same time, the correlation function goes to 1. So it means that even if the fields, you would call them soft so that they allow the two values of the variable, at the end, in this limit, they go to 1. So they become quasi-R. So to get them, well, you have to play a little bit with the equation. So make some reweighting of the distribution to have to control the non-trivial part. And then, well, you have a fixed point equation, which could look like a usual equation that we solve by population dynamics, but actually, there is in technical terms, it's an infinitely divisible distribution, but not of a compound Poisson type. So if you try to sample it numerically, you get into trouble. So there are some additional tricks to be able to solve it numerically that you have to introduce, but it's doable, and that's where the 0.871 comes from. No, C hat is not random. C hat is here, is how this curve here, if I take K to infinity and alpha to infinity.
No, sorry. If the soft fields are scaled that way, then half part of the soft field, the soft fields are becoming part of K to infinity. Can you rescale it in such a way that?
No, you cannot do it in a naive way. Because otherwise, if you do it in a naive way, you obtain something, a variable, which has no second moment. So you would like to expand it as a small quantity in your equation, but it has no second moment, so it's not really a small quantity. So this is not the way I followed, and I don't think that's the way you can follow, actually. But
Not just that it's probably
no, I don't see any simplification of this equation, but maybe there is. I don't know, but I tried. But. Okay, so let me turn to the conclusion. So, what are the natural things to do now? So, first, for the simple bias, so I said that one could not be too optimistic, but it remains to do precisely the asymptotic expansion, and we have almost done it, to see how much pessimistic one has to be on this strategy. Then we have to explore, as I said, more systematic biases with interaction at longer range, because there, in the paper with Lanka, Alfredo, and Luca mentioned, we showed that the rigidity transition can be moved, but really very, very strongly, and put very close to the satisfiability transition. So can one hope that this is possible also for alpha D is an open question, which, as I said, would have, I think, important consequences in both directions for the understanding of the hardness of such problems. And also for the second technical part of this asymptotic expansion, so there are natural things to do, like trying to do also the K-set problem and see if gamma D is again the same value as in the two models we have studied. And also these reconstruction problems, in technical terms, they correspond to the 1-RSB equation with the Parisi parameter m equals to 1. One can ask exactly the same question for the other value of the Parisi parameter. Thank you for your attention.
So, any more questions? Yes.
Do you think that for large K, one could solve perhaps the analytically averaged dynamics of a certain program? For example, survey propagation.
Okay, so there are some people in the room who have done things in this way. I mean, it really depends on which algorithm you want to study. So there is a world class of algorithm that makes sequential choice relatively simple that can be analyzed with the differential equation also, already at finite k and then analyzed at large k. Well, I mean, as I said, developed exactly a local sort of local search algorithm that is the best performing one. On survey propagation, it's very complicated because we did with Federico and Andreas the analysis of the a priori simpler belief propagation algorithm. It's already quite a complicated beast to analyze. Yeah, even at large k, but we had that it will at large k. Our guess was it was alpha d divided by log k. Okay, so it's even before. Survey propagation, it's a mess. So there are some variants of survey propagation that have been studied by Amin and his collaborators. But all the tricks that make it work in practice at small k are impossible to analyze analytically.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is